Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. I am joined not only by my rad co-host, Amy Hollenkamp, RD, but I am so pleased to introduce one of my dear friends and honestly, like one of my favorite herbalists. Here, I've got Thomas Easley. He is a best-selling author, and I didn't tell him I was doing this, but I'm totally plugging his book. And you can see, like, this thing is beat up, and it has 8 gazillion sticky notes in it. I have had this book for as long as it's been out. I think I got it the first week it came out. But Thomas is not only a best-selling author and an herbalist, but he is the director, right? Owner, director, both, I suppose, of the Eclectic School of Herbal Medicine. In what town are you in North Carolina? I know Low Gap, North Carolina. Thank you. I remembered he was somewhere in my state. But Thomas, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, and we're going to talk all about poops and burps and herbs and everything in between. So welcome to the IBS Freedom Podcast. And guys, what topic would we like to start with, if any? Thomas, can I kick it to you and put you totally on the spot? And
oh my gosh. Well, thank you for having me on your podcast to start with. I'm ready to talk about anything. I don't know that I disclosed to you, but I actually have IBS, so it's a lived experience for me, and I have I've got a lot of visceral understanding of what is going on, and I've worked with hundreds of clients that have it as well. So yeah, I mean, the sky's the limit. What do we want to start with?
Well, firsthand experience. Well, I guess I'm curious. So Amy and I both have had IBS before too. Amy was formerly diagnosed with SIBO. I never got assessed for SIBO back in the day when my gut was a train wreck, although I speculate maybe I had it. But I'm curious, like, what things have really helped your gut specifically, if we could start with that, and then I'm sure we'll chit chat about some of the various things.
Yeah. Well, so herb-wise, Triphala has been just an amazing remedy for me. And I think it's one of those formulas that often gets pigeonholed for constipation. And my IBS tends towards, my IBS is largely stress-driven and tends towards diarrhea. And I think that Triphala has a lot of utility outside of the constipation narrative. It's got some anthraquinone glycosides, it's got some little stimulant laxative bits, but it also has astringency and demulcency, two kind of key actions that I think of in IBS. And so I believe that its mechanism is tissue-based, working on astringing loose tissues or leaky tissues, and also the demulcency is soothing. So that's a primary herbal remedy, like kind of for my symptomology. But then managing my nervous system and emotional, mental wellness is the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah.
So all the adaptogens and nervines out the wazoo, I can imagine.
And I think that there are a handful of both Nervine tonic and Nervine sedative herbs that have an affinity for the digestive system, and those are the ones that tend to work the best for me. If you have if your physiological symptoms of distress include neck and shoulder tension, you might want to think about blue vervain. If your symptoms include head tension and headaches, you might think about skullcap. Well, the herbs that work on our stress response and nervous system that have an affinity to the gut would be things like wood betony. Stachy's botanica is a most excellent Nervine tonic.
Let me get out my notepad, by the way. I should be scribbling down notes ASAP. All right, wood betony, continue.
Well, okay, so to back up a second, there are three distinct categories of herbs that work on the nervous system, right? We've got like nervine stimulants like coffee and green tea and L-Ruthro and rhodiola and ginseng that increase sympathetic tone and help us be more alert and process sensory information faster. We have nervine sedatives like kava that sedate us, strongly encourage parasympathetic tone.
I'm picturing like valerian or hops as well.
Valerian is a mixed bag. Valerian is more of an antispasmodic than a nervine. And the preparation is super important. So valerian, when tinctured fresh, has aromatic compounds that stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. But those same compounds, when they degrade over time while dried, tend to stimulate the sympathetic side of the autonomic nervous system. So that's why some people can take valerian and get stimulated, and other people can take valerian and get sedated.
Okay, I was telling Amy about that not that long ago, and I didn't know the mechanism of why.
Well, I don't know for sure either.
Or we think that's why.
But I tend to find it a more reliable sedative when tinctured fresh than dried.
Okay.
So, you know, so kava, blue vervain, motherwort, lobelia. There's a lot of nervine sedatives that kind of run the gamut from nudging you towards relaxation and surrender versus pushing you towards relaxation and surrender. But then in the middle of those, you have nervine tonics, and nervine tonics are what people think adaptogens are but aren't, and they tend to increase your stress resiliency without being overtly sedating. And I think that because their action is a little bit more subtle and takes a little bit more time to come through, Americans tend to push towards the overtly sedating and not the tonifying. And I find that for the stress response in general, a nervine tonic that tonifies our ability to adapt to stress and increases our adaptive flexibility work better than just the sedatives do.
Okay.
So
and then I'm curious, what would some examples of nervine tonics be?
So ashwagandha.
Okay.
Fresh skullcap, not dried skullcap. Milky oats, fresh tincture, not dried. Both of those have labile compounds that dissipate when drying that are where the magic is at for the tonification properties. I would classify Damiana as a nervine tonic, holy basil as a nervine tonic. But then my favorite for folks with IBS that need to improve their adaptive capacity is definitely wood betony. It has such an affinity for the solar plexus area and where we hold tension in our abdomen. It's very grounding. It's very good for people that are like spacey, floaty, and still wired and stressed.
Okay.
So that's probably
correctly that wood betony could be used for headaches, or am I getting it mixed up with another herb potentially?
No, totally great for headaches. I think of it as a nervine tonic that helps with all types of stress-related conditions. I think that skullcap is maybe a little bit more specific for headaches than wood betony. And wood betony is a little bit more specific for abdominal tension than neck tension. But there's enough overlap where most nervines can have an effect on stress headaches.
Nice. Well, yeah, that's a good starting point, because I think, God, what is it, like at least once an episode, if not more, Amy, we talk about the stress and the vagus nerve and anxiety and food fear and all of just like the more tightly wound you get with this IBS journey, the longer it makes your journey because it impedes your ability to heal when you're all like tense and wound up and anxious and scared. And it's really hard for us to have a conversation with patients like, hey, let's add in a new food if they're terrified of adding in a new food. So
Yeah. And I think the trauma of the whole experience of having IBS and going through both conventional and functional models seem to be more trauma inducing. So like Nikki said, it's like so tightly wound, scared they're going to mess something up or make things worse, scared of foods. And there's definitely a lot of fear and anxiety. So the more they can build resilience from a nervous system standpoint, from adaptogens, nervines, nerve tonics, which you're talking about, can be really, really important, and I think can be very helpful. And I know Nikki and I have talked about too how like adaptogens are a little bit more of a slow go at times, where it takes some time to build up in the system and to really notice the effects. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so interesting that you bring that up, because I think in America we're so used to popping a pill and experiencing that bliss of whatever symptom relief is supposed to come from the pill. And I think, I've definitely experienced working with people that are like, oh, I've been taking this, not really noticing a difference. I'm like, maybe we just push through a little bit longer and see how you do on it for a decent period of time, and then we can better assess. But I think that's such a good point to bring up, that in certain cases, herbs do require a longer trial period to really understand how they're affecting your system.
Or even like with the tonics, if you're trying to tonify and build up the body, certainly.
Right.
At least like, and I will say too, I should have prefaced the episode with this, where Thomas is a bona fide herbalist, I would consider myself sort of his junior in a lot of ways, but also semi-internet stalker, because usually what'll come of it is that I'm like self-paced studying herbs or reading a book. And then I'll be like, I wonder what the answer to that is. And then I'll go haunt his Facebook group and be like, hey, Thomas, what do you think of this? And then I go off on my own again. So I don't have nearly as robust a knowledge of herbs as you do, but at least the way I've been explaining like nervines and adaptogens when I do use them with patients is I'll tell people, look, most frequently, these are not the herbs where like you take it on a Tuesday and then Wednesday, you're like, oh, this is great. Give it like a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and then we should be able to tell if it's moving the needle in the right direction. But sometimes I do have patients where like 3 days later, they'll call me and be like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. So it's not that can't happen. It's just in my experience, more often, maybe I'm a rotten formulator, but like more often it takes a couple of days or a week or two for people to really see a shift from these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Do you think that's accurate?
I think so. I think that so herbs exist on this very wide spectrum from food to poison.
Yeah, fair.
And the herbs that produce very quick results tend to be much closer to the poison side than the food side. Yeah. But the herbs that tend to create long-lasting change tend to be closer to the food side than the poison side.
Okay.
And and a lot of the herbs that create instantaneous change have been made into medications. You can still get a prescription for tincture of belladonna for your mucus-filled diarrhea, because it will strongly dry up all of your mucosal secretions by inhibiting the parasympathetic nervous system in the gut. Look at all of the pain medications. They're all originally derived from opium, poppy, and
aspirin. What was that? Willow bark?
Aspirin from meadowsweet or willow bark, depending upon who you listen to. Yeah, so a lot of the very fast-acting herbs are fast-acting because of specific constituents that have been isolated, purified, and turned into medications. one of the most important things that I think people should realize about at least the type of herbalism that I practice, which I would consider to be slow herbalism, like the slow food movement, is that gentle doesn't mean weak. And so I tend to use more I tend to use more gentle herbs than a lot of herbalists, but I also think it's really important to match the relative strength of the remedy with the severity of the problem. This goes all the way back to the rules for gaining a license to practice medicine in ancient Baghdad. So we're talking 2,000 years ago. If you wanted to practice as a doctor, herbalist, healer, if you wanted to practice as a healer in the marketplace in Baghdad, that's where you'd make the most money. But they had a group of practitioners, a council that said, here are the guidelines. If you use an herb when a food would suffice, or you use a strong herb when a weak herb would suffice, or you use food when a lifestyle change would suffice, then you're not allowed to practice medicine here. You've got to use the least intervention possible to gain the change that you need. And that's my philosophy. So I tend to focus on more gentle remedies for IBS, like wood betony, like chamomile. Chamomile is a miraculous remedy.
I was going to ask about chamomile. Like, where on the spectrum of like sedating, stimulating versus tonic, where would that fall in those categories?
So all of these categories have some subjectivity to them, depending upon the person and the sensitivity of their nervous system. I'm sure you've met some people that look at a cup of coffee and can't sleep for 2 days. Like those people's scales are different.
Yeah.
Where I would classify chamomile is right across the line from Nervine tonic into Nervine sedative. Okay. So the most gentle of the Nervine sedatives, but not overtly sedating unless you have a very strong preparation or you consume a very large dose.
Okay. Who would probably be doing that at home anyway? Like most people are probably going to use it as a tea unless you are working with a professional.
Right. Yeah. But the volatile compounds in chamomile are strongly antispasmodic. In the IBS world, a lot of people think about peppermint as peppermint oil capsules as the primary spasmolytic to use. Chamomile knocks the socks off of peppermint if it's prepared properly, which means a fresh plant material strongly infused in water, or better yet, a strong fresh plant tincture. Okay. Great spasmolytic, amazing anti-inflammatory. You get some bitter principles to stimulate digestive secretions. You get that nudge towards parasympathetic.
And it smells freaking amazing. Like even just the sensory experience of it. I laughed because I went to an herbal conference that's in North Carolina every year. I went to Medicine from the Earth a couple years ago. And I remember that one of the herbalists kind of like poked fun at people who like buy the shitty, bagged tea chamomile from like Kroger. Right. And they're like, yeah, you'll never go back to that once you have the real thing. And then lo and behold, I bought some like bulk, loose, dried chamomile flowers, and you just open up the bag and you're like, oh, I'm in a field of flowers and I could just die and go to heaven. Like, it's so amazing. Even the sensory experience of just making the tea is really lovely too.
So, yes. And I wonder if this might not be a great segue into talking a little bit more about sensory experience, the nervous system, and digestion.
Yes, let's.
Yes.
You go where you want to go, Thomas. We're following you. We're just here to soak up everything.
I'm here for the ride. Yeah.
Chip picked a good episode to be a guest today too.
Chip's very into herbs, so.
What up, Chip?
Obviously. Obviously, our little chipster is here today. But yeah, so go ahead and follow that thought, Thomas, because I would love to hear your thoughts.
So what I have found in my own body and working with clients is that holding space for the cephalic phase, for the anticipatory release of what is it, like 100 peptides and a 20% increase in gastrin, and there's a lot that happens there. I think that a lot of the focus in conversations that I hear about that is starts with food going in the mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's totally true. We have, chemoreceptors that we call taste buds that transmit to the brain specific classes of nutrients that are coming in that then adjust our digestive juices to compensate for that. But also, I think that part of digestion begins long before food enters the mouth, with the anticipation of food, the sight of food, the smell of food, with the sensory experience of food.
Yeah.
And I really wonder if a lot of the problems that people have with digestion is because we don't engage our senses with our food near to the level that we used to, because we don't cook a lot of our own food anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like, try not engaging your sense of smell when you spend an hour prepping and cooking a meal, right?
Yeah.
So I believe that our sensory input creates anchor points for the anticipatory regulation of the nervous system, and especially the autonomic regulation of the stomach and the beginning stages of chemical digestion. Even despite even without the sense of smell or the sense of taste, like, we get hungry at cyclic, normally fairly specific times. And it's not necessarily because our stomach is empty at that time. It's because we've entrained our circadian rhythm to when we're going to eat, right?
Yeah.
How does that entrainment happen? How do we, well, I think there's a huge conversation to be had about how nervous system regulation is much more anticipatory than responsive to stimuli. Peter Sterling, the father of allostasis, basically argues that our brain does not have enough processing power to deal with the sensory input and process it on the fly and respond to our changing environment. And instead, it seeks balance by anticipating our reality. And we use sensory stimuli to correct the anticipatory algorithm that drives our view of reality. And I think that lack of olfactory stimulation from plant compounds, because we don't spend as much time in nature and because we don't spend as much time cooking and with our food and using spices, I think that is one of the big contributors to nervous system dysregulation that results in distress, that creates a lot of digestive symptoms that reinforce the distress, that cause the insomnia, that aggravate the inflammation, that cause the pain. It's this big
snowballs from there.
Yeah, it's this big self-reinforcing cycle that can happen.
I'll throw this out too. I mean, everybody knows that if you want better vagal tone, all you have to do is gargle vigorously for 10 minutes every day of your life, and then closed case, done. And I'm being so sarcastic and bitchy right now, but like, this is the kind of stuff that honestly, it certainly is not talked about in conventional medicine. Absolutely not. But also, this is the kind of stuff that's not really talked about in functional medicine and dietetics either. Like, Amy, how many dietitians are really talking to their patients about that like anticipatory phase of digestion and like whether your body is prepared to eat? I mean, like, how much does that really get talked about in our worlds? Not that much. And probably not in herbal
Yeah.
medicine space, Thomas, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I think that, it's hard. I think we think of, oh, making your food and connecting with your food. Sometimes it's hard to even get clients to take a lunch break. That's like a discussion that I have around, like, even like the anticipating and priming, getting everything ready from a nervous system digestive standpoint is so interesting. But I find that people are so dysregulated from like even a meal timing standpoint, and like there's a lot of chaos in their circadian rhythms and patterns, that I do think that's such an interesting point, that there's really, you're losing the experience of it and using all the senses even before you're eating the food, making your food look appealing. I mean, a lot of our food is so packaged at this point. Is the new appeal like how it sounds when you're opening a bag of chips or opening a packaged food item? And again, like, there's certainly times when I eat some packaged food items. I'm not guilting anyone, but there's, again, plenty of times when I'm making my own food. But yeah, I think that that's such like an interesting dynamic, is like how quick, easy things have gotten in our nervous systems, and our bodies are not adapted to really respond well to quick, easy, convenient food experiences and digestive experiences. It just doesn't work well.
Yeah. Although I'll throw this out there, and then sorry, I'll let you continue your thought, Thomas. Another thing too is that I feel like a lot of our patients, at least, frankly, don't enjoy their food anymore.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of people who work with us where like the pendulum has swung aggressively the other way, where now they're hyper vigilant and they're on, AIP or low FODMAP or low FODMAP SCD hybrid or whatever, and they're like super keto, low carb. And we have people who are combining different diets or avoiding all these different foods. Like, oh, I can't have tomatoes because of the histamine, and I can't have onions because of the FODMAPs, and I can't have this because of this. And I know for a lot of people who are feeling really stuck, just like the fact that they're not enjoying their food anymore is such a big piece of it. And I just had a patient, I think I talked to her on Friday of last week, and she was like, yeah, I'm doing basically the same as last time we talked. But she said, you know what was weird, Dr. Daneza? My husband and I went out to dinner for our anniversary. And I forget what she said. They got like tacos or something, or burritos, like nothing especially healthy. And she said, I felt totally fine and normal. And then like another week later, for some reason, like she was running behind, she was late. So her husband was like, oh, just get some Chick-fil-A and bring it home. And she's like, okay, I'm going to pay for this. And then she felt totally fine and normal. And she's like, maybe a lot more of this is my stress around food. And I think it could go both ways, where like there's a lot of people who are not cooking enough and they're not like connecting with their food enough. And then some people, it becomes like this obsessive orthorexic behavior where like everything has to be 100% organic and 100% low FODMAP, and like it becomes kind of a neuroses in itself, and then they become tightly wound and they're not enjoying their food. And honestly, I've had some patients where I've suggested, when I think they're receptive to it, like, okay, one of your homework assignments is you go out to eat like at a restaurant and you just pick something that looks delicious. Like, health be damned. If you want to get the pickled pig's feet and the, I don't even know what else, like, you go for it. But just pick something on the menu that looks delicious to you and you know that you're going to enjoy. And you do that once every 2 weeks. That's part of your homework. And it can really be helpful to have people just enjoy their freaking food again, too. So I wanted to make that point as well, because I see that pretty commonly.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I'm currently updating my my autoimmune class series, and for years I've talked about, like, not everybody needs to do the AIP. Not everybody needs to jump into dietary eliminations. Let's assess people where they're at and what their capacity for change is and how resourced they are. And no matter how many times I say that, it's still difficult to convey. So for the very first time, I've added some rigidity to my autoimmune guidelines. And now my protocol states you can't do any dietary elimination for a minimum of 1 month, where your exclusive focus is on improving nervous system adaptability and improving nutrient density. And that can I've got it broken into phases, and I've got like phase 1 as a 1 to 3 month process. Before you think about eliminating foods, let's focus on improving nervous resiliency, improving general vitality and nutrition status. And we can patch symptoms up as needed in that process. But I've seen so many people, myself included, develop some disordered eating because of dietary restrictions. That then create a ton of distress, which then reinforce the mechanisms by which food intolerances often arise. And sometimes eating a box of cookies is the exact type of self-care that you need for your nervous system, despite the effects on other body systems. And sometimes we have to rebalance that food is fuel versus food is fun equation and find a happier center point.
Because I think if you're at either end, it could be dysfunctional. Like the people, who are not thinking about nutrition whatsoever, and they're, I don't even know, like eating ice cream every single day of their lives. That's a bit much on that side. But then again, this orthorexia idea and this idea of like, I know for me too, like I also developed some food issues when I was working on my gut, because for me it was like, oh, I got X amount of improvement from eliminating at the time 4 foods. So I must get X amount more improvement if I eliminate 10 more foods. And it was like, I was constantly searching for this food holy grail and thinking, oh, I bet I'm just sensitive to corn and I just don't know it yet. And then I would eliminate corn. Or like, I bet I'm just intolerant to this and I just don't know it yet. And I thought like miraculously things were just going to shift and change and like the veil was going to be lifted up. And it turned out to be quite a bit more complicated than that and quite a bit more stress driven than that.
Yeah. And I think that you're right, Nikki. Like, I think the seed gets planted when people are doing low FODMAP or something. They do it initially and like, oh, wow, like I did notice an effect. So it's a food problem, not other system problem. And I think to Thomas's point too, like from a nutrition side of things, like some of these AIP diets, there's no putting things in the context of nutrition. It's all about elimination. There's no discussion around like, are you getting enough vitamins, minerals? Are you getting enough total carbs or protein or fat? Like it's all, and that's the frustrating part, I think, as a dietitian, is you have people going to practitioners that aren't necessarily super well trained in nutrition. And then they're saying, here's this list of yes and no foods. Whatever you do not eat anything on the no side. Only stick to the yes side.
Or without the SIBO will win and you will die.
Right. Without any discussion of like what that means nutritionally or how they're going to actually be able to get what their body needs in that context. Like, I think it's one thing to maybe try a therapeutic diet, but as long as you're guided and like understand what does that actually look like on your plate. But so many people are just off doing, diets sort of on their own based on this list that they were given. And that's where it's, I think, frustrating. Nutrition just tends to take a back seat, and nutrition's so key in every body system. So people think they're doing this amazing thing being AIP or low FODMAP or on a SIBO specific diet, But if they're not getting what their body needs, they can't progress. And like that's what we see all day long a lot of times is people not really getting enough nutrition in.
Well, and if you think too, like if somebody is, let's say that you have a person who's eating like a pretty standard American diet and say they have like rheumatoid arthritis. Say that this person is like massively deficient in like folate and iron and, B12. And then you take that person and you're like, okay, now here's a ton of foods that you can't eat anymore.
Right,
Good luck with
right.
that. Like, unless you help them get their levels up and like understand, oh, hey, you need to get more of these foods. Like, the likelihood that their deficiencies will get worse instead of better is very high if then you take somebody, like if they were already deficient in a bunch of stuff on a very broad diet, then as soon as you constrict them to this little tiny box, it's like the likelihood of that deficiency becoming a bigger problem probably goes up tenfold. And now you have like the orthorexia patterns and they're like obsessing over the good and the bad, like the red and the green foods. And it turns into such a clusterfuck after a while. So I'm glad that we're making this point because I think it's valuable.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that understanding the purpose of dietary restrictions is really important. So you understand where the flexible areas are and where they aren't. Right. I was just talking with my current group of full-time students last week about the AIP diet, and somebody said, well, how do you get enough protein if you do a vegan AIP diet? And I said, well, it's difficult.
You don't do that.
But you can, if you tolerate hemp seeds, and you can get protein there, and you can also get good protein from mung dal. And they said, but that's a legume. You can't have a legume on the AIP. And I said, but why? In mung dal, the pea is split and skint, and you've removed almost all lectins, almost all phytates, and you have just pure starch and protein left with very little immunogenic content. I think that's totally appropriate as an exception to AIP if you're vegan and need to get extra protein in, So like understanding mechanisms and why I think is super important. And that's not something that you're going to get from a list.
Yeah.
At least not any list that I've seen. It's something that, the list is a starting place, and then you look into why and mechanisms and exceptions and
like you tweak it and you troubleshoot and figure out what works for the individual instead of this rigid, regimented, like these are good, these are bad, end of story.
Yeah. Like you can't have mustard because mustard comes from a seed and all seeds are eliminated. Are you freaking kidding me? Like, yeah.
Eat mustard. Yeah.
It takes so much effort to write out every possible exception that I'm guessing that's why nobody's done it. That's why I haven't done it. But somebody needs to talk about the caveats and the nuance and the like why this might be allowed and in what situations. And like I commonly modify AIP to allow for white rice, and I've seen one case out of hundreds of people that I've guided through the AIP where white rice was problematic. So yeah, anytime we talk about food eliminations, I think if it is based on a black and white list, you should probably push it away until you understand why and how to make the exceptions. And
or you have some guidance or somebody that you can at least bounce ideas off of.
Right.
It could be, somebody could be on AIP and then they could think, oh, but like gluten's okay for me, right? And then they come, and they ask one of us, like, oh, gluten's okay for me, right? And we could give them the honest opinion, like, no. Like, that's what you probably need to really give a go. Versus, could I have some mustard? With a Vita Loca, man, like, eat the mustard, whatever. Yeah. Yep, I think that there's a lot of rigidity and a lot of dogma on the internet and probably every other podcast for that matter. But usually we're big fans of trying to have a broad diet and try to spare some of your sanity whenever possible. Because, like, I don't know, you only get one ride on this rock hurling through space, as far as I can tell. So I'm going to make the most of it. So, like,
Yeah.
I have my, I've got like snacks in the office. I've got like cashews and pistachios, and I've got my inulin, and I
Mhm.
also have a big old bar of chocolate. Like, and I'm gonna have a little bit of sugar, heaven forbid, every now and then. But
Yeah.
if that's the one thing that I have every now and then so be it. I'm not really worried about it. And I'm
I
not even worried
mean,
about my definition of now and then either. Like, now and then could be every day, depending on the week, or it could be once a week, depending on the week. And I don't
mhm.
really care.
Yeah, not infrequently recommend that clients have a minimum of 1 ounce of chocolate a day. It's
There we go.
if chocolate and coffee and so many or other things that are normalized in our culture, if they were, if they were discovered, if they'd never been discovered and they were discovered today, and all of the research that we have developed from their recent discovery, we would totally put them in the same category as goji berries and noni fruit and all of the superfoods.
Mhm.
Like they're amazing, and also have probably radically altered the course of the evolution of our species, which is
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard about the influence of chocolate and coffee on Western philosophy.
Mhm.
But Descartes, I think, therefore I am, right?
Mhm.
Uh, Descartes began his exploration of philosophy at the same time that coffee houses opened up in Europe after discovering coffee and chocolate in the Americas. And he's reported to have consumed between 40 and 60 cups a day of dark chocolate, coffee mixtures. And I could like after drinking a pot of coffee, my mind is racing so much, I would completely discount what's going on in my body and only consider my thoughts to be valid. I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
There's an argument to be made
Oh,
that these plants have changed the course of human history because of their psychoactive influences.
uh,
Yeah,
interesting. Well,
I love both coffee and chocolate. So,
I'm a big fan of chocolate. I love the smell of coffee, but I can't stand the taste, unfortunately. I actually I wish I was a coffee drinker,
mm-hmm.
because I've seen the studies that like coffee drinkers are less likely to get dementia, and it has polyphenols in it that are good for the microbiome. And dare I say, did we just segue into one of the topics we meant to cover anyway?
I
I
think
think
so.
we just did. But I have this worksheet that I give a lot of my patients where it's like a nutritional diversity tracker,
Mm.
and it's just all the foods I could think of or Google on one sheet of paper. Literally, like a list of vegetables A to Z, fruits A to Z, gluten-free grains A to Z, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, and then like a miscellaneous category. And their
Mm.
goal is to circle things every day for 7 days. And their goal is to get up to 30 or 40 points for diversity sake for the microbiome. And I put coffee and I put chocolate on there and I put exercise. Like, no, these aren't plant foods. And the research paper I was basing this tool off of revolved around unique plant foods or plant fibers during the week. But if exercises increases microbiome diversity, then yeah, you got a point for exercising. Why the heck not? Or like if chocolate has been shown to be full of polyphenols and feed the good gut bacteria, then absolutely. You know what? I will show you. When I say a large bar, I mean like one of these Trader Joe's pound plus. I didn't mean like a normal chocolate bar, by the way, that I keep in my office, but like I'm going to give myself a metaphorical point when I have a piece of my giant chocolate bar. And I stand by that.
Let me show you my favorite theobromine caffeine. Oh, hang on, I've got
Okay.
a box right here.
This is like a fun little show and tell.
Yeah. Okay. So if you don't like coffee, but you like the effects of caffeine and theobromine, then I might suggest the brand is Ya Ya Ya, and this is American Yopon. And Yopon is the only North American source of caffeine and theobromine. It grows all over the South. It's a holly family, and it's very closely related to mate from South America.
Okay.
But it's got about an equal mixture of theobromine and caffeine, and it has almost no astringency. The taste is pleasant. It won't dry you out. It is my current favorite nootropic to help me with focus and energy.
Intriguing. I will be ordering some after we hang up.
It's also sustainable. You know, I think about the impact of coffee and chocolate on the environment and the people involved that are often poorly compensated. What I love about this is, you know, it grows all around. This company does a great job of drying and roasting and mixing with other herbs. So super sustainable, and also
interesting.
Yeah, gives you the magic of coffee and chocolate without the emotional connection to the deforestation and you know, all of the things that go along with it.
I love the name too. Like, I feel like if I drank it, I'd be like, yeah, 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 and I'd have like my little mug or something.
Do that little wiggle when I get mine.
Right.
Funny enough, I just did a Google search to pull it up because I didn't want to forget about it, and you get some interesting YouTube videos at the top of your Google search when you pull up just ya ya ya. You have to go to drinkyayaya.com to actually pull up this particular product, but it looked like there was some, I don't know, like dance YouTube videos or something,
probably
music videos or something. So, and maybe they're doing the Amy Hollenkamp little shoulder roll in the process, but I'll have to go back and revisit that Google search later and see what those are all about. But yeah, that's really intriguing. And that, you know, just a minor segue, neither here nor there, but we've talked a little bit back and forth about kudzu, and I'm really intrigued by using that medicinally. I don't really know what to do with the damn stuff right now, but I need to learn more about it and like find some recordings of some lectures or something. But I'm really intrigued by kudzu because for those of you who don't live in the South, it's what do they call it? The vine that ate the South. It's a plant that just grows like a freaking weed, and it can grow like a foot a day.
Yep.
But it can be used as medicine, either the roots or the leaves. I mean, you can talk about that, but can we segue just for a moment on kudzu?
Yeah.
And then we can go back to polyphenol talk, because I definitely want to cover the polyphenol thing too.
Sure. So it's normally the root of kudzu that's used for medicine. The blossoms of kudzu make a very tasty jelly that I love. The use of the roots comes from traditional Chinese medicine, where kudzu is native, and it's used for dryness and tension in the neck is its specific indication. It has some structural applications. You know, anytime you go to palpate someone's neck and the fascia feels not just tight but like atrophied and dried, I think of kudzu for that. It's very good for back of the head headaches, secondary to fever. So it's very popular in TCM for things that are edging towards like meningitis neck pain, and it might even have some immune modulating activities to it. It's also a really rich source of prebiotics, and has a demulcent, a soothing, calming action on inflamed gut tissue. So it's got a pretty wide utility. And then one of the more interesting uses for it that's modern is some small studies from Japan showing that It causes a voluntary decrease in alcohol consumption in people that that are consuming too much alcohol. So, yeah, I think of it when people are like fried and dried and compensating with booze.
Okay. I like that way of say it, fried and dried. I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah, I wonder, and maybe I could ask you this later, but I wonder if I could find like a person who is harvesting it here in the southeastern United States, and like we might as well chop it down. Nobody likes it here, and it's not native to our country. So I wonder if we could find somebody who's like sustainably harvesting it, and then I could purchase it from them.
Yeah, I'm sure you could. The roots, the older the plant is, the bigger the roots get. So I've literally pulled 100-pound roots out of the ground, and so it's easiest to harvest when you happen to have a bulldozer clearing it out and exposing the massive roots that you can, unless it's a younger patch, and then you can easily harvest the younger roots too.
Business opportunity. Okay, we will all go in. We'll buy a bulldozer. And we'll just drive around North Carolina and Georgia and South Carolina, and we'll plow up the kudzu root, and then we'll package it up and
you have no idea how much I want a bulldozer. So yes, let's do that.
Well, we'll hope that Santa is listening to this podcast episode, and that you could get your bulldozer someday. If I can swing it, if I find a bulldozer for a good deal, I'll let you know.
Okay,
and you can perfect. Over to my end of town. But let's go back to the polyphenol talk, because that was actually something that I had on my radar that I really wanted to talk about. So polyphenols as prebiotics for the good microbiota is something that I know, like, we think about from food. I don't know if I really articulate it to my patients a lot necessarily, because sometimes there's a balance between like, shut up, lady, I just want to get better. I don't need to know all the things. And the people who are like, I need to know everything. Send me the PubMed ID to the articles you referenced. But yeah, if you could speak a little bit on that, either from foods or plant medicines or both.
Yeah. So I am of the opinion that many herbs and foods exert their systemic influence on the body, not because the compounds are absorbing into the bloodstream and diffusing into tissues and, stimulating receptors, but because of their impact on the microbiome. And I think that is a much needed conversation. And totally reasonable. What just bugs the snot out of me is like the whole black pepper and turmeric thing, right? Like, well, your curcumin doesn't absorb, like you only get 1% absorption, so you have to take piperine to get your curcumin to absorb. Well, that's just bullshit. Like, number one, who says that curcumin and curcuminoids are the most important constituents? When we have animal studies showing that curcumin-free turmeric extracts decrease inflammation in mice just as much as curcumin does. And if it's not just the curcumin, then why are we trying to get that constituent to absorb? And if it is the curcumin and it doesn't absorb well, how does it exert an anti-inflammatory influence with such poor absorption? Well, it turns out that it strongly shifts the microbiome and what are the two big phylas? Firmicutes and bacteroides?
Firmicutes and Bacteroidetes. Yeah.
There you go. The words that I can never say. So the polyphenols in general and polyphenol compounds like curcumin strongly boost the B phyla and say that word for me again.
Bacteroidetes.
Bacteroidetes.
I think, or am I thinking of the genre? Hold on, now I'm questioning to myself. Am I thinking of the genre or the? Hold on, I'm going to answer right now. Let me pull something up. because the thing that drives me crazy, and part of maybe why you don't remember it either, is that the phylum, the class, and the species names are like annoyingly similar for those bacteria. So there's Bacteroidetes, Bacteroides, and Bacteroidea. And it drives me out of my mind. So hold on, I'm going to definitively answer this because yes, I'm looking it up. Hashtag gut expert. Hashtag don't care. Yes, Bacteroidetes is the phylum. Bacteroidea is the class. And Bacteroides, it would be like the name of the individual in this individual species. So Bacteroidetes, I stick with my original opinion. Continue.
So polyphenols tend to boost the Bacteroidetes, and that ratio seems to be most imbalanced when we have low fiber diets, when we have high fat, high protein, low fiber. And the microbiome patterns in obesity and diabetes are, to me, patterns directly resulted from stress, low fiber, and low polyphenols. So what I love is that while most of your prebiotic fibers just kind of feed everything, the selective prebiotic action of polyphenols is profound. And I think there's even an argument to be made that a lot of the symptoms of food intolerances come from selective prebiotic actions that we don't fully comprehend, or that we haven't even started to comprehend, really. It makes sense for me that because plants growing in the dirt create compounds that build specific microbial associations in the ground, that those same compounds would be very selective in their action in our body as well. And so plants are producing their medicinal compounds, not for our purpose, but for their own purpose, to gain more nutrients. And what nature shows us time and time again is that cooperative work instead of isolated work is what makes everything thrive. So we have these plants that are creating these chemical constituents that are supporting specific fungi and bacteria in the soil by feeding them. And then they do a similar thing in our body. And if we happen to have a dysbiosis, then it makes sense to me that that the specific compounds in gluten-containing grains might feed a particular kind of bacterial or fungal species that could be then creating issues. Kind of this, the inverse of blueberries are good for your gut is some foods might feed species that create undesirable symptoms.
Yeah.
So where I'm at is giving clients a list of polyphenol-rich fruits and vegetables with the amounts and saying, I need you to shoot for like 1,500 milligrams a day minimum of polyphenols. Here's some common foods that you can do it with. For a lot of years, I just said, eat 3 ounces of blueberries a day. And now I'm like, actually, olives are a great source. And there are all of these other currants are a great source. And there are all of these other things. So, yeah, I'm really into the idea that a lot of herbs exert their action by selectively feeding or suppressing a particular species of our microbiome. And polyphenols seem to be, on the whole, very supportive of a more balanced immune response, of a less inflammatory response. And also, I love coffee and chocolate and blueberries, and so I get to eat more of my.
Those. I
Yeah,
love it. Well, I'm in agreement with that. And I think I like that idea, kind of giving people a list and saying, all right, have at it, and giving them some variety. Because if you think too, telling people to just eat a handful of blueberries a day versus maybe they eat blueberries on Monday and olives on Tuesday and I don't even know, like et cetera, et cetera. And if
yeah.
they have a wider variety of the polyphenols, then maybe they're going to get some synergy from the different polyphenols acting together to some degree. And I wonder that too, if I may, I'll kind of bring up a topic that I think I already know your opinion on, if I had to guess. But that is, I've noticed that particularly in the quote unquote functional medicine space, and definitely in the integrative medicine space, and to some extent, even like even naturopaths sometimes will fall prey to this. But I've noticed that there's again, like the curcumin idea, like this idea that we need to extract out the one constituent, the one thing. And, so many functional medicine or integrated medicine people have their patients just taking capsules of berberine or capsules of oregano oil or capsules of allicin. And it's like, it always makes me pause and wonder, all right, would you be better off doing the whole plant, or maybe like, do you need to take the fancy schmancy $60 allicin capsules to kill your methane SIBO? Or would you be better off keeping the damn garlic in your diet and not bothering with the low FODMAP thing? And then you can get some antimicrobials and antioxidants and probably a lot of other compounds that are synergistic through food if you were to just eat the freaking garlic. But I see that a lot with herbal medicine, where like I think that herbalists usually are more hip with the synergy of the plants and how multiple plants will work together and how different compounds within the same plant will work together. Versus, and unfortunately, I think that my field tends to fall prey a little bit more to like an allopathic model of herbal medicine, where it's very just like, here's the active part of it, we'll put it in a capsule, and then here you go. And I suspect that you agree with me that that's not necessarily how these plants shine the best.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with green allopathy. There is something very wrong with green allopathy being marketed as holistic, right? So if we think of herbs on the spectrum from food to poison,
Yeah.
the preparation of the plant can shift it one way or the other.
Mm.
So, like, you probably wouldn't sit down and eat an entire raw onion. But
You don't
if
know
you
me. Okay, go ahead, continue.
But if you took that onion and put a little bouillon and brown sugar and popped it in the oven and baked it, you would transform a very potent medicinal only remedy into a food.
Mm-hmm.
The same can happen the other way. Barberry is a fairly gentle berberine containing remedy. It is best suited for mild to moderate imbalances. Standardized berberine is a very strong remedy. It is best suited for more severe imbalances. We're just trying to match the relative strength of the remedy to the severity of the problem. You don't tell somebody that just got into a car wreck and broke their leg to go take some willow bark. You say, here's some freaking pain relievers, right? Here's some opioids. We'll help you. We'll decrease the strength of. We'll take you off of those and get you on some other things as you get better.
Yeah,
But the
we'll cross
severity
that
of the
bridge when we
problem.
get there.
Yeah. And you wouldn't tell someone that had the sniffles or a vague sense of unease that they needed belladonna, henbane, gelsemium, like our low-dose botanicals with a high potential for toxicity.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to match the problem to the remedy. And when you standardize and concentrate something, you no longer have the whole plant and therefore shouldn't use it like the whole plant. You've changed the remedy. I think berberine's great. I put people on standardized berberine for insulin resistance fairly
Mm-hmm.
regularly.
Yeah.
Also, I think that barberry tincture is a much better remedy for increasing stomach acid production than berberine is, because you're engaging your sense of taste. Those bitter receptors are signaling to your brain, and you're
I
getting.
was going to say it tastes gross, doesn't it?
It's bitter, yeah, but we have. I don't think bitter is gross. I think bitter is bitter.
Said like a true herbalist, folks. Continue.
Yes, if you think like radicchio is bitter, then you probably shouldn't start with barberry. You should probably start with a more mild bitter than barberry, which is I would classify as moderately bitter in taste. But I also think that we have, as a culture, a raging bitter taste receptor stimulation deficiency. We've bred the bitterness out of all of our foods. The lettuce that you ate 100 years ago is like, the most bitter arugula you could get now. And iceberg didn't exist. Like, in all of our foods, we have selectively bred the medicinal constituents to be less, and the sugar to be more, or the starch to be more, which makes total sense 100 years ago when our culture had a raging or at least chance of raging calorie deficiency. But calorie deficiency isn't the big issue anymore. It's phytochemical deficiency and micronutrient deficiency, not macronutrient deficiencies. So I have no idea where I started with that, other than to say that you've got to match the strength of the remedy to the severity of the problem, and you should eat more bitter things.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to point out too, I liked what you had talked about with, like if you used an herb when a food would have sufficed, then no practice for you. Yeah. And if you use a food when a lifestyle change would have sufficed, like you don't get to practice anymore. And to that point, literally 99% of conventional medicine doctors and probably 95% of functional medicine doctors would not be allowed to practice, probably, if I had to guess.
I mean, and 80 to 90% of herbalists too. Like it's not it's a cultural thing that has influenced multiple systems of medicine.
Yeah.
But the same type of cultural unwinding that can facilitate more change and relief of disease, I think can also influence systems of medicine. We I believe need to move away from a disease model that is focused on acute disease and how we respond to it, and towards a wellness model that is focused on foundational actions and mechanisms that we all need to build health and vitality. So I think it's a cultural thing, and I have very strong opinions on, so I developed what I call functional herbalism based on this idea that we need a little bit of structure to our systematic approach so that we aren't all over the place, and that structure can't come strictly from traditional herbalism, because we as a people are different than when traditional herbalism evolved as a system of medicine. So in my system, I talk about pretty extensively the realm of health, the realm of adaptation, and the realm of disease, and how they're distinctly different areas that require distinctly different mindsets and approaches. And I think modern medicine is great at overt pathology. I think that
Absolutely.
they suck at identifying the adaptations that precede the overt pathology and chronic disease by decades. And I think that they have no clue that the realm of health building actually exists.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that our focus shouldn't ignore pathology, and and allelopathy helps that, and green allelopathy, and we totally need to address disease, but we also need to talk about imbalance, dysfunction, adaptation, and we need to talk about the fact that doesn't matter who you are, you need adequate calories and adequate nutrients to be healthy. You need community support, social networks. You need other people to be healthy. You need adequate sleep to be healthy. You need adequate movement to be healthy. And if you're ignoring those foundations of health, then you're just going to play whack-a-mole with everything else. So,
and that's exactly what ends up happening.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm super talky and rambly. Sorry about that. Feel free to focus me back in.
No, right.
That's the glory of the podcast. We just get to talk. So, by the way, time check real quick. Amy, how much longer do you have to stay with us until you need to take Chipster to the vet?
I have about 20 minutes. The vet's like 5 minutes away, so it's not.
Okay, perfect.
It's not far.
Do we have time to pick Thomas's brain about parietal cells a bit and
I did.
Because
I did want to ask him too, kind of a follow-up. You had mentioned bitters with the barberry. Do you have any other bitters that you like from a digestive standpoint, like that you use?
Yeah, so hundreds of plants that I love using as bitter digestive stimulants. Typically, I think that people should start their bitters with the more gentle food-based, like dandelion.
Yeah.
David Winston, a friend of mine, kind of created this bitter digestive bitter guideline for formulation that he calls DOPA: dandelion, orange peel, angelica.
I did want to ask
dandelion, orange peel, angelica, and peppermint as a basic digestive bitters blend. I love throwing blessed thistle into my digestive bitters. It's super sustainable. I love artichoke leaf in my digestive bitters, super sustainable. I love gentian in my bitters, but much less sustainable. So I typically start with dandelion, burdock, artichoke, and use those as the core bitters. And then most bitter formulas need a little something aromatic carminative to add to them. And orange peel and peppermint are frequently part of my basic bitters formula.
Cool.
Love also, a bitter green salad before a meal does the same purpose.
What about, do you ever use andrographis as a digestive bitter? Because that is one of the nastiest herbs I've ever tasted in my life. It is so bitter. But I know it's used more like for immune purposes typically, right? Or at least that's my understanding of it, at least.
Yeah, so it is totally pigeonholed as a immune herb, and yet the compounds that in petri dishes stimulate the immune system don't absorb. They interact with the microbiome. So I think that it is a good gut remedy and kind of digestive bitter, more so than a direct immune stimulant.
Okay.
It's also too intense for noobs. It's only for seasoned bitter takers.
It's nasty.
And if you think that andrographis is bitter, you should try a fairly rare herb called picoriza. Okay. It is more bitter, and it lingers in your mouth for 10 times as long. Same thing with Cryptolepis, which is a very strong anti-malarial, antimicrobial from Africa that's finally gaining some popularity. Those are two herbs that I would classify as more bitter than Andrographis.
Note to self, not for me. To be clear, the reason why I don't like coffee is because I think it tastes bitter.
Oh my God.
And similarly, I will not drink beer because I think that all beer is bitter. And my husband loves like really hoppy beer in particular.
Okay.
And I'm just like, no.
So I would say that either you are a super taster, which around 10% of the population has many more bitter receptors than everybody else, or you have a raging bitter deficiency, one of the two.
Let's hope you're a super. I would just say you're a super taster, Nikki.
I'm not fussy. I know about the super taster thing, and I'm not especially fussy over, like, most foods I like at least somewhat. Like, my body can't do gluten or dairy, so I can't do those for medical reasons. But like, other than I don't like coffee or beer, and other than I really don't understand why people eat eggplant. But that's more of just like a texture thing. But
It's
like
weird.
pretty much everything else I will eat. And I'm otherwise not too fussy. So I'm kind of leaning towards I might just have a raging bitter deficiency, and maybe I'm not super taster, because aren't super tasters normally like fussy about the fruits and vegetables that they eat?
I think so, yeah.
I think I'm just doomed. I need
Do you
to.
have enlarged circumvallate papillae on the back of your tongue?
I don't know.
Okay, well, just I've been making interesting associations between the size of the.
I can't tell. I'll send you a picture.
Okay.
You better get
Anyways.
that checked out. Stat,
Yep.
Nikki.
Yeah. So for you, Andrographis would be not an amazing starting place, but
I can't keep up with it when I try to
yeah,
introduce it. But maybe dandelion, eh?
maybe start with dandelion and mix it with something aromatic that helps with the taste. Even chamomile has, if you steep it long enough or you chew the flowers, even that has some nice bitter principles that are often overlooked.
That could work.
So you might start with something that's a combination of bitter and carminative and work your way up to the Andrographis.
Okay. I might try that out. I'll have to get back to you. Or maybe if I throw in like some fennel or some cardamom or something that has more flavor to it, maybe it'll kind of mask it a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. So yes, I think the other question that we had talking about, if that made sense, via email was parietal cells. And stomach acid is something, again, that I think in all of our professions, it's probably so misunderstood, where it's just like, oh, just gargle for 10 minutes a day vigorously until you tear up. And it's like, well, that's not appealing. Or just take betaine HCl, 8 capsules a meal for the rest of your life, end of story, see you later. But I'm curious to pick your brain a little bit about the, and for those of you who don't know, parietal cells are the cells in the stomach that make stomach acid, and they're kind of a big deal. So if I may, let's open the floor for that.
Yeah. So the production of stomach acid is this fun, chemical dance where, oh man, my brain just blinked. Oh shoot, what's the enzyme? Carbonic anhydrase. So the zinc dependent enzyme in your gastric parietal cells. They're the first step in the creation of the free hydrogen ions that get pumped through our proton pumps into the gastric lumen, where they interact with the chloride and create hydrochloric acid. So we've got this zinc-dependent enzyme that is breaking water apart and creating bicarbonate to push out into the blood, and free hydrogen ions to push into the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
That process is fun to explore. And sometimes, raging zinc deficiencies very strongly influence or suppress the production of stomach acid. Most people have adequate blood chloride. It's not like our nation is suffering from a salt deficiency. And so I think the often overlooked component of the parietal cell, well, the two overlooked components is, number one, what stimulates the parietal cells to produce stomach acid? That's a combination of acetylcholine from the parasympathetic nervous system, histamine, and gastrin. And our gastrin is initially released in that cephalic phase, in the anticipatory phase, where we're thinking about food and we start to chew, and that starts the gastrin release process, which is then reinforced with stretch receptors in the stomach and chemoreceptors sensing protein in the stomach. But it starts with thinking about food, with smelling food, with tasting food, with engaging our senses, which also tends to shift our autonomic nervous system, which is the autonomic nervous system is not like a sympathetic dominant, parasympathetic dominant, right? It's this all of our tissues are innervated with both branches, and it's this constant tug of war so that we can adapt and shift pretty rapidly, right? And so the parasympathetic shift from engaging our senses, especially the smell and volatile compounds, engaging the limbic system and encouraging the parasympathetic response, all of that starts the parietal cells converting water into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate. So I think that's often overlooked. And then the other big thing that is often overlooked is the concentration gradient of hydrogen ions in the stomach versus in the parietal cells is wild. It's like around 4 million to 1. And the energy required to push hydrogen across that concentration gradient is significant, which is why half the volume of our gastric parietal cells are taken up by mitochondria. We need tons of ATP to push hydrogen into the stomach to create hydrochloric acid. So all of our mitochondrial nutrients are essential for stomach acid production. And this is most obviously apparent when you have iron deficient anemia and you have a decreased mitochondrial ATP production because of the iron deficiency, which then leads to hypochlorhydria, achlorhydria, low stomach acid, right? Which is needed to absorb non-heme iron. So then you get into this cycle where anemia suppresses digestive fire, and digestive fire and when I say digestive fire, I mean all of the processes of digestive catabolism, all of the breaking down processes. Yeah. So we have to have
digestive gusto, if you will.
We've got to have energy for fire, and we've got to have fire for the absorption of nutrients to create energy. So we get in this vicious cycle where mitochondrial nutrient deficiencies, in my opinion, lead to low stomach acid production, which will lead to poor absorption, which reinforces that whole thing.
And that makes so much sense based on like 98% of our patients, Amy, honestly, because what have we said every freaking podcast episode? That if you're not nutrient replete, if you're under eating and having massive food issues, if you're not getting adequate nutrition, you're not going to have nutrients you need to build up your body and keep it healthy and run enzymes, but also, boom, like you're not going to have the energy to do basic things like make stomach acid. So you might not have to take 8 betaine HCl pills every single day of your life. You might just have to eat more food and get more calories. And then you might miraculously start making stomach acid like you're supposed to.
If you're me, you might need a few B12 shots to correct your lifelong B12 deficiency, and then all of a sudden your digestion miraculously improves. There's so many layers to it that I think it's easy to get stuck in the betaine HCl and bitters rut without actually looking at all of the other components required for the production of digestifier, for the production of hydrochloric acid. And then, you combine that with strong, persistent sympathetic stimulation that moves all of your blood from your internal organs outwards for that fight or flight response, and you wind up getting atrophy of your mucosal layer, so that when you finally relax and start producing stomach acid, it actually burns and doesn't feel good in your belly, and then that makes you unconsciously not really like relaxation very much if you feel bad in your belly, and so my work is about my work clinically and in teaching students is about identifying which of the numerous vicious cycles you're stuck in, and where we can apply the most leverage to break the cycles.
Kind of like throwing a bit of a monkey wrench in one of those vicious cycles and trying to have some point where you can intervene.
So I've never seen kind of explicitly laid out the mitochondrial nutrients required for ATP production. That's something that I came up with I don't know, just 8 or 10 years ago probably. And when I started shifting my focus from just bitters and HCl into hey, what's deeper, I really started getting better results with my clients. And I have to say, like, non-anemic iron deficiency is so much more prevalent than I would have ever thought, and that I think mainstream medicine probably recognizes. I've seen people that their digestion sucked until their ferritin hit 40 or 50, and then all of a sudden their digestion started getting better. I'm a big fan of heme iron versus non-heme iron, since you don't need the hydrochloric acid for heme iron absorption, and I find that's a really helpful way to break the vicious cycle of iron deficiency leading to low stomach acid, leading to poor iron absorption.
And there is a line of supplements. You actually turned me on to them a few years back, but there's a Proferin is the brand name, and you can get them on Amazon now, but I've had some patients do really well with those as well.
Proferin, and they recently, after years of me begging, probably not just me, but it was you. It was you. But they recently created a line called Clear that has no additives in it. So amazing. In lieu of that, Ancestral Health spleen supplements are super iron rich. Liver and liver supplements are super heme iron rich. Lots of ways to go about that, but the Proferin is one of my favorites too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Amy, I want to be cognizant of the time so that you can get your pup to the vet. I would definitely talk with Thomas all day, every day. But I think we hit a lot of the big things that were on all of our radar. But maybe we'll have to have you back on the pod, Thomas, because this was a lot of fun.
That'd be great.
I know, like, I took away a couple of really big clinical points that I think will help my patients. So I'm really grateful that you came on the pod. And for those of you guys, again, maybe you weren't paying attention to me when I did the intro, but Thomas has a book. You can get it on Amazon and various other book type places, called the Modern Herbal Dispensatory. It's awesome. I have many a sticky note in mine. And you could go visit him at the Eclectic School of Herbal Medicine. I think that's the URL, eclecticschoolofherbalmedicine.com. And there's actually a student-run clinic, so you can work with the herbal students and get some coaching and some help with the students that are in his program. There's online courses. I mean, there's normally, when it's not COVID times, you do like classes out where you are. So if you're local to North Carolina, you could go actually take a class and meet Thomas in person. But all sorts of great stuff on the website. So be sure to check out his website and his book. Amy, any closing remarks? I think that's about a wrap from what I've.
No, this has been really great. I think the last point, I'm glad we were able to get in the ATP stomach stuff in, because I think that's so key. And I think it aligns with too, like what we always talk about, what you were discussing, like under eating. Not only is that weakening your resilience from a nervous system standpoint if you're not getting enough nutrition in, but again, thinking about it from a stomach acid standpoint, it could be depleting ATP and all these other things. So more reinforcement there to continue our work with making sure people are well nourished. Right. Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Thomas. That's why we have you on.
We knew we liked you. Yes. And look, I don't know a better way to wrap up the pod. So guys, as always, thank you for tuning in. If you are watching this on YouTube, please click the like, the subscribe, the bell, do whatever you do on YouTube, and leave comments. We do go back through the YouTube channel comment section, and that's where we're mining comments for our Q&A episodes. So go ahead and leave a comment if you have a question or something that you want to shout out to us. We also have an Instagram channel. My God, what is it, Amy? Is it IBS Freedom Pod or Podcast? No. There we go. And we have an email address. It is ibsfreedompod@gmail.com. So holler at us. Let me know if you have questions, and we will see you in the next episode.
Thank you so much for having me on.